I'm not a big rules guy. When I live my life, I really don't like to have a bunch of rules. I like to figure things out on my own. But when we're talking about fantasy football breakouts at the running back position, there are some rules that I have found from 10 plus years of research doing fantasy football, trying to find breakouts that we can apply when we're trying to find breakouts here. So we're going to get into the rules to find a fantasy football breakout at the running back position in this video and how I got there and all the research that I've done over the years. So go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. And let me tell you about what I did. So over the last 10 years, starting out from 2014, what I did was I looked at the top 12 running backs in each fantasy football season, and I wanted to find which one of them took a major leap in each particular year. So the qualifiers for a breakout, I think we need to address right out of the gate, is what is a fantasy football breakout? The qualifiers to me is you need to play at least 10 games, because that really is going to determine whether or not you actually mattered season long when it came to playing on somebody's fantasy football roster. And you also need to be top 12 in fantasy points per game. I'm not looking for top 12 finishes here. You need to be top 12 in fantasy points per game, because that shows us on a per game basis who's getting the biggest impact on your fantasy football team. And the last thing I'm looking at here is, in order to qualify to be a fantasy football breakout, you need to finish at least 10 spots higher than your previous year. Your previous full year needs to be worse by 10 spots than your most recent year. So those are the qualifiers for a fantasy football breakout, and really that's what a fantasy football breakout is. So what I did here, dating back to 2014, was I found running backs who hit all of those qualifiers and saw what I just wanted to see, what their age was, what the opportunity was like, what the volume was like, the touchdowns, and the fantasy points per game, and what they did in their previous seasons here. So you can see, this is a pretty extensive list. If I went through this whole list, we would be here talking about this list all day long. What I just kind of want to show you here is that when it came to fantasy football running backs over this time frame, the first thing that I wanted to point out here was that obviously age is a major factor here. When we're talking about fantasy football breakouts, the guys that are breaking out are typically younger guys in their first 2 to 3 seasons of fantasy football. If you came in at 21, you were probably breaking out at 24 years old. And what I found with this sample size right here is that 23.7% of the guys on this list, only 23.7% of them broke out after the age of 24. The guys who did it, Raheem Mostert in his age 31 season, that's outrageous. Justin Forsett, LeGarrette Blount did it at age 29. Jamal Williams at age 27. James White at age 26. And Latavius Murray, David Johnson, Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard at age 25. So that is like, you're not really going to see many breakouts after the age of 24. Not saying it can't happen, but just from a general rule here, we want to follow this rule because the most of the breakouts are going to be in their first, second, or third year in the NFL. Now, the other thing that I wanted to identify in this particular research was, what was the opportunity like heading into the year? I'm not talking about opportunities as far as volume goes. That's not the kind of opportunity I'm talking about. We'll get into that in a little bit. The opportunity I'm looking for here is going to be related to who was in front of them or who wasn't in front of them heading into the particular year in fantasy football. And with a lot of these guys, what I found with a lot of them is either they were drafted to be the guy at running back and they broke out their rookie year, or a lot of them had situations where their rookie year, they were in a timeshare, and then their running back one in front of them left the next year or the year after that. So an opportunity opened up for them. Think of somebody like a James Cook or a Rachaad White. With Tampa Bay, Rachaad White had Leonard Fournette his first year. Then he bounced, and Rachaad White broke out in 2023. James Cook, there was Devin Singletary there in 2022, and then he left, and James Cook broke out in 2023. So the opportunity was there for them at the beginning of the season, and that was a major predicting factor that we could determine led to more volume at the position at running back here. And obviously, volume's a big piece of it as well. But how you can determine who's going to get volume heading into the season is just look at their opportunities here. And there's some guys that I've identified here, and we'll go through them at the end, who I think have chances to be fantasy football breakouts at the running back position, just based on their opportunity that they should have coming into 2024. So just going through all of that research right there, over the last 10 seasons in fantasy football, what I have found as far as the rules go for finding fantasy football breakouts at the running back position, there's 3 of them. There's 3 really important rules here that we need to follow. Number 1, opportunity is everything. Again, You need to follow the opportunities that are coming up for these guys. I'm not talking about the volume they got in previous year. I'm talking about who left the backfield. Or are they just surging up to be the guy? Or were they drafted to be the guy? We need to find what the opportunity is of a particular player heading into their season, and that is something that we can identify most of the time, excluding guys like Kyron Williams, who is a massive outlier of all outliers. That's a very unpredictable one. James Cook, Rachaad White, those were very predictable breakouts here, and we'll get into it. Now, the number 2 thing, the next rule, is that volume is king in fantasy football. And everybody understands this. When I say that, I am not sitting here proclaiming to be some fantasy football genius. Everybody understands that volume is king in fantasy football. That's just an obvious thing. But the thing is, when you combine the opportunity that could be coming up, you can find what the volume may look like heading into their next season in fantasy football. And the last thing that really is going to separate just breakouts from very good breakouts, the guys that we discussed in the top 12 of fantasy points per game, is more often than not, they're going to have efficiency that's going to be very, very good. You exclude somebody like Rachaad White, whose efficiency I have not been shy about. I think he's got bad efficiency numbers, underneath 4 yards per carry in both of his first 2 seasons. But you look at a guy like James Cook, he's averaging over 4.5 yards per carry on the ground. James Cook is a very efficient guy. Kyron Williams, 5 yards per carry type of guy. So you need to have the efficiency there to really make an impact on a fantasy football roster. So when we apply all of those rules and we apply all of the data points, I wanted to find some potential breakouts heading into 2024. Now, there are some obvious guys on here just based on players who have left. Think about the guys who have left their teams. Josh Jacobs left the Las Vegas Raiders. Zamir White, just based on opportunity alone, is a very good potential breakout. He's 24 years old, right there at that limit. So if he did break out, now is really the ideal time that we should see Zamir White break out, because the volume should be there because he's the lead back. They've got Alexander Mattison as the backup. Alexander Mattison got overtaken by Ty Chandler last year in Minnesota. So I'm not really worried about Alexander Mattison taking touches away from Zamir White, especially since we saw Zamir White at the end of last year do very well in fantasy football. Think of another guy. Joe Mixon left the Cincinnati Bengals. That's a high-octane offense right there that is primed for a fantasy football breakout at the running back position with Zach Moss. Zach Moss, yes, he's 26 years old. That's the major problem here that I have. But Zach Moss, when we watched him last year with Indianapolis, it was very good stuff for a while there. We had very good success with Zach Moss at the beginning of the season without Jonathan Taylor. And then, of course, when Jonathan Taylor came back, Zach Moss rode the pine. But who's the other competition in Cincinnati right now? The other guy is Chase Brown. Chase Brown's also a guy that I could see potentially having some upside in fantasy football, just based on the fact that he's a little bit younger than Zach Moss. But with Zach Moss, he looks like he's going to be the guy they go forward with. And the bottom line is with Cincinnati, this is such a high-octane offense when Joe Burrow is healthy that you want to have a running back in this offense in Cincinnati. Think about another guy. Saquon Barkley left the New York Giants. Now, with Devin Singletary, there's a lot that could happen, and he might break out. I'm ultimately going to stay away from Devin Singletary because Devin Singletary is 27 years old. And yes, he was signed to be the guy for New York, but he's also walking into a situation that Saquon Barkley was trying desperately to get away from in New York. One of the worst offensive lines in football. One of the least talented offenses in football. It just doesn't really move the needle as far as the moves that they made. Yes, Malik Neighbors is great, but he's not going to really open up the run game if the quarterback can't deliver the ball. So Devin Singletary, I see the potential there. I think there's a chance that he could be that guy, but with Devin Singletary, I'm ultimately trying to stay away from somebody like that. And then the last two teams with major holes as far as the running backs that left, Dallas and the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, the difference here between both these teams and the other teams that we discussed is that there's really not a clear answer at the running back position of who's going to be the starting guy. We have an idea that Gus Edwards probably leads the backfield in Los Angeles, and I've already drafted a ton of him on Underdog. Will continue to do that on Underdog. The team I'm really worried about the most is the Dallas Cowboys, because you look at their running backs here. Rico Dowdle is 26 years old. Zeke is obviously closer to 30. And Deuce Vaughn is 22 years old, but the guy is a shrimp. He is not going to get a 3-down back workload. So Zeke already broke out. He's disqualified as a fantasy breakout. Rico Dowdle, the potential that he breaks out, I think is decent because they do have a good offensive line. They do have a good offense as a whole. And I could see the upside here with Rico Dowdle if the opportunity is there. And by all accounts, I think the opportunity should be there. And Rico Dowdle is still pretty cheap in fantasy football drafts on Underdog right now. And then there's a couple other guys that I really like the potential of as well. Kamani Vidal, the Los Angeles Chargers, rookie running back. He's 23 years old, coming a little bit older. It was drafted in the later rounds of the draft, but he still has that opportunity behind a great offensive line in Los Angeles and a run-first team without a clear running back one. So Kamani Vidal, at the price you're getting him at, I've actually tried to target him quite a bit as well. Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders, I think there's a chance he goes to like a top 12 running back. It's not likely. I don't think it will happen, but I do think there's a decent shot of it with a running quarterback because history proves that running quarterbacks produce efficient running backs in fantasy football. And then Bijan Robinson could break out as the #1 running back. That's what he would need to do to really qualify as a breakout since he was a top 12 guy last year. And Trey Benson, I think could legitimately break out in Arizona. That's more unlikely because James Conner would have to really give up volume, but I do think it's a possibility. So I wanted to isolate the guys in a couple different categories here. What I wanted to find was out of those potential breakout players right there, I wanted to find the guys who have the highest upside in fantasy this year. I also wanted to find the best values in drafts on Underdog right now, and I wanted to find the guys that I think you should just avoid. So there's 4 guys with the most upside, I think. Bijan Robinson, obviously, because he could break out and become a running back 2 this year. I think it's very, very possible he's the running back 2 overall. I have him ranked there. Trey Benson, I think he's a high upside player. Not going to say that his opportunity is perfect. He's still lagging for me in the opportunity area, but if all the things line up, I think his upside is high. Zach Moss, opportunity is there. Upside last year was there with Indianapolis, so I think with a full year with Cincinnati with no clear guy, Zach Moss definitely has a very large amount of upside. And then Brian Robinson Jr., I do think has top 12 upside this year. I'm not saying it's likely, but I definitely think it's possible based on the running quarterback that is going to increase his efficiency. And he was never a guy that was getting a lot of targets anyways. So if we could see him jump to like 10 rushing touchdowns and like 5 yards per carry or close to that, I think the upside is potentially there. The best values, I think there's 4 of them. Jalen Wright of the Miami Dolphins, I think is a very good value here. Jalen Wright is the running back 45 on Underdog right now, and he's a 21-year-old rookie for the Miami Dolphins. Now, this one has a lot of things that could go wrong here. Raheem Mostert, the thing that I see is that Raheem Mostert is in his 30s now, and he's coming off an elite season, and that was also the only season he was healthy for the whole season. So there's a chance that Jalen Wright could see target touches along with Devon Achane and have a decently successful breakout year. Zach Moss, I also see lots of value there as well at the running back 26. Tyjae Spears of the Tennessee Titans, running back 38 right now on Underdog, and a guy who's very efficient and ultimately I think does have a decent amount of upside because Tennessee, I could easily see going to a 2 running back system like Dallas had with Tony Pollard when he was most successful with the Cowboys. And then Kamani Vidal, again, great value at the running back 49. Now, the 2 guys that I think you should avoid, Deuce Vaughn and J.K. Dobbins. I think Deuce Vaughn, like I said, he's just too small. He's not going to handle really more than anything other than like maybe a 3rd down running back role. And I don't think he'll be that consistent with getting volume. And then J.K. Dobbins at 25 years old, what could have been player. I loved the player, but he's been just marred by injuries. And I just don't think that he's going to be their guy considering he only got $50,000 guaranteed from the Los Angeles Chargers right here. So all in all, the guys that I really think that you should be targeting as potential breakouts when we follow the rules of fantasy football breakouts at the running back position are guys on teams like the Arizona Cardinals, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Washington Commanders, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Miami Dolphins here. So I hope you got some value out of this video. Make sure to go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support.